Oh, welcome. Oh man, I never know how to do this intro. It's an issue. So before going into a rant about how I can't find my mic, let's talk about the topic of the week: victimhood culture. I wanted to approach this topic because I found it quite interesting that in our culture today, I am constantly hearing about self-empowerment and you can do anything, and simultaneously, you're a victim. The patriarchy has got you down, and all these words that are just in conflict with each other. So, to start off, I want to talk about critical theory. So, if you don't know what critical theory is, it basically places the world into a box of oppressor and oppressed. So, basically, either you are a person who is oppressed or you are an oppressor. These ideas come straight from Marxism and what is called the Frankfurt School. Basically, the Frankfurt School abandoned its old ideas of the class struggle and decided to focus in this philosophy of critical race theory. Critical theory is a shallow analysis of history, society, politics, art through the lens of power dynamics. Again, everything is oppressor versus oppressed. When you see the world through this lens, it's really hard to see anything else, any other nuance. And the only way to achieve equality and to give power to the so-called oppressed is through force. By the way, this critical theory can go towards critical race theory, where these power dynamics are played out through race, and through critical gender theory, where the power dynamics are played out through gender, men versus women. So therefore, these people that are using force to give power back see themselves as totally justified in using violence against whom they perceive to be the oppressors. And so those using violence view themselves as morally superior. Let's use the example of the left and the right, which I'm sure you can relate to right now through the situation of 2020 in the United States. And quite honestly, through most of Western Europe. Imagine it's the left who's helping the weak, or the left that perceives itself to be oppressed. They can do no wrong because they are virtuous. The right, on the other hand, the oppressors, are oppressive no matter what they do, because they are perceived to be in a position, because they are perceived to be in a position of dominance. And again, that's perceived. It's all about the perception. So in this power struggle, where the oppressed use force, violence, and intimidation to take power away from the oppressor and then take power for themselves, they're ultimately looking to become the oppressor. There's a book right now, and it's a bestseller that has the line in it. It's the book How to Become an Anti-Racist, and the line goes something like, the only way to fix past discrimination is with present discrimination, and the only way to fix present discrimination is with future discrimination. So at least a lot of these people have no qualms about what they're doing and constantly creating these power dynamics. However, in some forms, I don't think many of those people that promote critical race theory think that far ahead. This person that wrote the How to Be an Anti-Racist books, obviously in a way, is advocating for discriminating now and discriminating in the future to combat the present discrimination. There's a quote by Nietzsche that goes, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." So, let's step out for a moment of the critical race theory, of the philosophy of critical race theory. As I said, we have this strange mix in our culture where people like Tony Robbins can become millionaires, telling people that they themselves have the power to change their lives, that we have the power to change our lives, that the power lies within us and not through some external circumstance, that as long as you believe that you can do it, you can. There's that famous quote, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. So, how is it that it almost feels like both messages are being sent simultaneously, sometimes to and from the same group of people? Hollywood is a good example of this. I personally lived in LA for a couple years, and there was this constant messaging there And the people that I surrounded myself with that also believe in the victimhood of certain communities. So the constant messaging was how your thoughts attract your reality. Now I understand that's a more spiritual view of the world, but I just cannot reconcile both of those views. How can that be? In a culture that is telling people that they're victims. I realized this when I kept being told that I've been conditioned to think a certain way by society because I was a woman, and that the patriarchy was keeping me down because, well, of how I look. I started internalizing this and looking for moments where in fact I was being put down. Thankfully, that lasted about for 5 minutes and I snapped out of it. But just imagine someone that is being told that they're victims, that the country's against them, that the majority of this country is against them. Imagine that person growing up to those messages, how hard it would be for them to break out of that mentality. They're being told this since they're children. If people are thinking that they're victims, they're mentally enslaving themselves and whoever they're teaching this to. Now people are living this constant state of fragility, demanding not to be offended, not to be triggered, demanding a constant wrap of safety around them. While sometimes, simultaneously, there's something going on in here because they are constantly contradicting themselves. They're simultaneously demanding this wrap of safety around them, demanding trigger warnings, demanding not to be offended, but then at the same time, they view themselves as saviors of those who they perceived are more oppressed than they are. And so, in order to alleviate some of the guilt as their status of oppressor, because remember, the world is viewed through a lens of oppressor and oppressed. So if you're not being oppressed by someone else, you must be oppressing them. So again, in order to alleviate that guilt that they put themselves, and as they believe that they're the oppressor in this case, then they put on a cape. And they tell others that they are victims, that they're gonna save them. If they don't agree, well, then they just don't know better. The person that this savior is telling, hey, I'm gonna save you, you're oppressed. If the so-called oppressed does not agree they're oppressed, then the savior will just think, well, that you don't know better. I know better than you. And that comes from a place of feeling of superiority. How ironic. This person doesn't know what's good for them. And so they fight for whom they perceive to have less power and less privilege. So I cringe at words such as white privilege or male privilege because it implies they have it better than me in some way. And I do believe that there are privileges in both sides. I think that I have some privileges over men as a woman. And I think some men have a privilege in some senses. Everyone has some sort of edge. Everyone has a skill that they can do better than everyone else. That's just the way of the world. We're not going to become all exactly the same. All that we can hope for is that opportunities are equal and the law looks at us equally. We can look for equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. I want to tell you about this little story by Kurt Vonnegut. The story is called Harrison Bergeron. And the story is basically about this society where everyone is forced to be equal in some way. If you're taller and stronger, you have to carry weights around you so you're not stronger than those who are physically weaker or shorter than you. If you're more beautiful, you have to put on a bag over your head. If you're smarter, you have to listen to something in your ear that stops you from formulating intelligent conclusions and thoughts. That's a society if we keep striving that everyone needs to have equality of outcome. I'm going to recommend that story to you and I'm going to link it below here. And I'm going to end this video on a positive note. I'm going to be reciting a quote from Katherine Woodward on how we hold on to victimhood. So the quote goes, "Life is a creative process, and our thoughts, beliefs, assumptions, choices, actions, and words are the tools that we use to circumvent our experiences and our circumstances. In order to own that our lives are an act of invention, however, we have to give up the idea that we are victims. We may have built an entire identity around being victimized, so we couldn't possibly just let it go. Simply put, remaining a victim is costing us love, it's costing us freedom, it's costing us happiness. I want you to know that trying to change everything around you, trying to blame everyone else is not going to bring you peace. It won't bring you any happiness. It will keep you stuck. You have to change your inner beliefs before your outer world changes accordingly. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think, and if you yourselves have, at some point in your lives, put yourself under the weight of victimhood and believe that narrative about yourselves.